Hello, everyone. As you might guess, we're here today to do something very important, which is the real status of the Earth politics with regard to ET exopolitics and how to understand the current mess, hence wars and situation on Earth, to get a real update on the ET situation, given that everyone else seems profoundly confused. Hello, everybody. Dan Winter, fractalfield.com. And today's conversation, the text is at fractalfield.com/ET ET physics, all one word, small letters. And so I am joined here by Jack Riley. Jack, you've seen with us before. Jack is perhaps we could say, a world expert on the synthesis of the extraterrestrial situation given the Swaruu and Tegatan Pleiadian position. And you see many outlines of that. Thank you for joining us, Jack. Jack is the expert because we think the Tegatan Pleiadian material through Swaruu is some of the most extensive synthesis of the description of Earth ET politics that exists in the literature. And to have synthesized that material in the way that Jack does makes him an expert. So thank you, Jack.
Thank you.
Jack also is involved with crystal healing extensively and works with our Fire with also with Jake. And so, speaking of Jake, we're so glad to have you back, Jake. It's been too long.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, I understand, Jake, that you just did a new film on the ET situation, ET politics. Is that right? Galactic history.
Well, I started it's got like 12 chapters. It's more of a storytelling based,
I see.
talking about galactic history from, the great expansion of Lyra to the Orion Wars and the destruction of Tiamat to pre-Atlantis times on Earth, Lemuria and Atlantis and all that. So, yep, I just have that out on my YouTube, Astral Irma.
So that's wonderful. So, and remember, Jake represents the Urma line, which are the astral surgeons and the real power, and they were even regarded as powerful by the Tegatan Pleiadians. And the trauma that happened when we realized that the connection with Swaruu, Sophia, and the Tegatan Pleiadians had perhaps gotten infiltrated late last year, as reported by Gosha, and that's part of what we're discussing. What happened? Because the Tegatan Pleiadians were there giving us solid advice for years, and suddenly, oops! And Jack and Jake have a report on that. And also joining us is Sarah Solstar. Thank you for coming, Sarah.
Thank you, Dan.
Sarah has been amazing. So Sarah has an amazing maturity for her age. She sits there in Tunisia, and we were just discussing the example that, remember when Jake had always reported that his first assignments from Sophia and the Pleiadian was go over there to the damn pyramids, and it's an astral mess. You got the biggest astral parasites on the whole planet all clustered around the pyramid, and they told Jake, Sophia, right? Isn't it right? Jake told Sophia told
Yep.
him to get over there, over that pyramid, and kick some butt because it's a mess. And so what it turns out, well, I had that experience myself when I was younger. This guy named Dan Chesbro says, "Oh, I'm taking one representative from every house of the zodiac, and we're all going to the Great Pyramid. And we're going to do this amazing ritual." And thank God I didn't go. Well, my friend, the engineer's wife, it's a long story. They went and they came back from that trip to the pyramid with some of the worst life-destroying astral parasites ever. I mean, really a horrible mess. And so Sarah described her experience in Tunisia as being the consultant you go to. If you're in Tunisia and you just came back from the Great Pyramid and you got astral parasites all over the place, who do you go to? Sarah. Why?
Thank you. I have experience in that, lived experience. So
She's been there.
yeah.
It's
But
messy.
I think it's not maybe not just astral attacks and problems in Egypt. I think a lot of issues could happen in important places around the world, and then people would gather there, and then they would go to different countries. But so a lot of things are coming in as well from different places.
Yes. Mm.
That's why it's really important to have great astral hygiene, spiritual hygiene, and to know how to mm, decipher and see what resonates with you, what's good, what's bad, what doesn't work with you.
And
That's
how to steer, yes, which is getting us back to our major theme of the day, which is, so here we are. We all have been looking for the right ET contact in order to make the connection. And we were following Elena Danaan, and then we realized, oops, it really got messy. I mean, and then Donnie Henderson finally announced, oh, well, Elena was wrong. Don't trust the Federation. And then Donnie Henderson, who was the chief attack dog for Elena, announced, oh, nope, Elena was wrong. The Greys have not been ejected from our solar system, and et cetera, et cetera. And so, and our friend Dahlia and others sincerely believe that actually Elena's Thorhan is really Etorthan, which Jack is going to speak to, an Etorthan shapeshifter whose favorite thing is to pretend to be a handsome, tall Nordic, and Etorthan Thorhan, if you get it. And the Etorthans had an agenda behind the propaganda for the Galactic Federation, which Elena espouses, which is keep the money flowing. The Galactic Federation, as in the Cabal, make big bucks because Earth is a loosh farm for human trafficking, and which fits the whole description of the whole problem that we are disempowered until we are ensouled and empowered. And so obviously, most of us realize that there are some serious astral hygienes there. I'm not just speaking about Elena, but I'm speaking about that whole lineage. And then you have Michael Salla. You know, it's wonderful that he interviews everybody. I did a lot of interviews for him, and I like him. And he did one great interview with me, special, Jack, specially because he wanted the lowdown on the latest from Swaruu. He was interested. But in terms of discrimination, I'm sorry, Michael, but announcing that what the world really needs is Donald Trump to become president of the whole world may not be the solution. I'm sorry, Michael. And actually, as Jake himself said, although, we like JP, he's obviously a sweet and wonderful guy. Jake, I think, sort of confidentially said, Jake once said, it seems obvious that JP really doesn't know who his handlers are, question mark, which is like, where is the discrimination here? So who do you trust? And this is where we're getting back to what is the real context and what is the real situation with the Galactic Federation versus Earth and ET politics. And is it enough for Elena / Michael Salla / the Disclosure Project being saying, oh, all you need to do is convince your government to do disclosure. Doesn't that make you feel good? No. The reason it don't make you feel good is because, and that's what this whole show is about, is that forcing this government to do disclosure is rather like asking the guy who designed the mousetrap to help you to get out of it. I mean, it's not that we shouldn't. I mean, obviously, when we get into this, for example, when Shane and others reveal that the CIA-directed Monroe Institute is actually a massive soul trap, as many of these situations are, they're Focus 27, and all they were doing was convincing all of the remote viewers to lie for the government. That's what Monroe Institute has ever been doing ever since the CIA was their paycheck. And the reason that they need to lie for the government is the US government is, I'm sorry to say this gently, but has been a tower of lies from the day they lied about winning World War II. They lost. All the presidents were hiding under the White House in 1952 because they lost World War II. Why did they lie? Well, so the whole thing is a stack of lies. And even Michael Salla did a pretty good job of showing that Kennedy wanted to reveal that. And that's basically why he died. And so the stack of lies of the government behind all of these various soul traps. And that's the point, that so many of these institutions are in effect a subtle trap for souls, as Bob Monroe himself called a loosh farm. So the problem is to recognize that forcing that government to reveal the ET history is going to take something more than simply a political information. It's going to reveal the point at which people discover that their only way out. Well, as they say, the only way out is in. What that means is imploding to the kind of bliss that gives you leverage in the longitudinal array. You become a lucid dreamer, you become an astral shaman. At that point, you get that implosive leverage, that tornado in the plasma, what the Icelanders call the great mass of God, of those who have Kundalini. You get a tornado in your aura, and then you're no longer food. But until then, your head didn't pop above the bubble, and you are by definition food for a parasite. So the way Shane puts this, and this is a little bit of say you're going to say it and then say it and then say you said it. The way Shane puts this is that waiting for the ETs who are arriving in metal ships to fix us is absolutely perverse because the ETs who are actually advanced would never come in metal ships. Hello, they come in living plasma through the heart of the sun. And the only way you can perceive them and even be part of their world is when your aura is implosive and coherent enough. You have access to bliss, you're a lucid dreamer, you're a shaman, you're going to take memory through death. You have a soul. That's the moment at which there is interferometry connection possible. What's called connection to source, what's called sovereignty. All of that means is the implosion happening inside. And until then, waiting for the ETs that arrive in metal ships to fix us is absolutely the wrong approach. It's disempowering and it ain't going to work because this is where we want to talk about the Federation later. Those in the Federation who are involved in interfering with Earth from metal ships are not the high leverage good guys. No, no, no. Like even the Andromedans, and Jake was just, maybe Jake wants to speak to this, and Jack, I'm sorry, Jack was speaking to this too, that the Andromedans have been living on metal ships for thousands of years, and what we call a soul, maybe not so much. And so when remember, indigenous people living on the same song line for 1,000 generations, they implode into that array. They can call the wind, they can hear their ancestors, and they can feel interstellar things happening. These are called sun gods. This is called having a soul. And if you don't have a planet that's imploding, hint Schumann, and you don't stay there for a few thousand generations, you don't ride the long wave. So the meaning of getting a soul here gets very, very important. So anyway, I carry on. This was an introduction to some themes. I think before I carry on too much, maybe we should go around the room here. And if each of us wants to just say like 3 to 5 minutes about what you think are the most important themes for today.
Sure. Whoever wants to start,
Go
I
ahead.
can.
Go
Get
ahead.
that started. I think the majority of people interested in extraterrestrial politics, exopolitics, but even just Earth-based research alternatively, it's just important for them to identify what makes something worth listening to. And that metric that we're trying to talk about today and using is if it electrically, if it is bliss-inducing, if it allows you to, in a more layman's term, internalize your power instead of externalizing it, instead of trusting the plan, instead of looking outward. And so, unfortunately, through a scientific lens, uh, you would prefer to have multiple sources. That's right, of course, right. You'd prefer multiple people be working at the same level, sharing the same type of intelligence from the same um, intent. But unfortunately, it seems that there is only one good source that is sharing both extraterrestrial politics from their perspective, which is generally rare on Earth. There's only, so many perspectives that you can choose from, but that also stand up to critical thinking and this type of metric that we're attempting to use, where they're
Right.
encouraging you to compare all your sources and then um, figure out whether or not the information that you're receiving and putting into practice has anything to do with creating your own bliss, creating your own power, and trusting yourself instead of externalizing that responsibility into something that may not be in your best interest, even if it looks so. And unfortunately, as you get into this, there are so many people. It's difficult to put black and white claims on movements such as Trump's Q, and then that's at a political layer, and then above that you have tons of different new age contacts and channelers and whatnot. And so it's just important for people as they go forward, when they're comparing information, it's a very simple metric. Is it empowering you on a personal level to take responsibility?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
I, I think it's rare to find perspective from extraterrestrial politics that also embodies this metric. And
Mhm.
so I'll just read through the central extraterrestrial politic claim on behalf of the Taigetans. Uh, who actually runs Earth? The central claim of the Taigetan material is stark. Earth is not a developing world evolving in isolation or organically. It is a heavily regulated territory under the control of the Galactic Federation of United Planets, or just the Galactic Federation, a physical, multi-racial conglomerate of enormous proportions that has controlled this galactic quadrant since the aftermath of the Orion Wars, roughly 850,000 to 900,000 years ago. Quote, the Galactic Federation are, as Salvador Brichedo once said, the invisible owners of Earth, managers of human affairs, and top of the pyramid. Control seems to be layered like an onion, where there are official governments visible to the public, then deep state secret societies. You could look into people like Jordan Maxwell for interesting information on that type of stuff. Non-human regressive species, reptilian, gray factions, and then further secret societies running those species, and finally the Federation itself. Compartmentalized, with each layer ignorant of the one above. The chain extends from Antarctica, where human puppet leaders pledge allegiance to the non-human representatives, to the Andromedan biosphere Viera behind the moon, all the way to the rings of Saturn, where the Solar System High Council operates in total secrecy.
Mm.
But
So
Brian, I could continue, or you can go ahead.
yeah, no, this is good. So you see that we are administrated here. That's what the point we're getting to. The Tegotan Palladian material through Swaruu is very comprehensive, and Jack has assembled a major synthesis thereof, which today's article, fractalfield.com/etphysics, has that summary, and we'll be reviewing more of it in a minute. And that's a beautiful introduction to the themes. Thank you, Jack. To be continued, which then might bring up Jake here for a moment. So one of the biggest controversies here then becomes, look, we thought the Andromedans were the good guys and the administrators. Turns out they've been living in artificial planetoids so long, maybe they don't have the kind of soul that we really thought they should. And maybe you don't get a soul if you're on an artificial planetoid. And maybe they don't have the level of emotion. And at a worse level, as the Swaruu Tigans played, their compatriots in crime, the Etorthans, who seem to be deeply embedded in the corruption of the Federation, and the Loosh Farm, which do things like shapeshift and fool Lane and all this kind of messy stuff for the Etorthans. You got the Etorthans and the Andromedans. Are they part of the problem or the solution? And then the Tegotan Palladians, who we thought were helping us. Swaruu gave us this huge, wonderful body of information. And then late last year, the whole Tegotan Palladian Swaruu lineage of information kind of fell apart when Sophia and Marie and the Palladians had infiltration, according to Gosha. And so, comment on that, Jake? Question mark.
Wow, there's a lot to unpack here. Basically, we don't know what's going on with exopolitics. That's one of the problems, is that, there's so many conflicting narratives coming from so many sources. The Andromedans, they're not an emotional race like us humans are. So they're more logical based, and they're very based off karma as well. The Taigetans were the militaristic arm for the Federation, for a number of years until Queen Alanin came to power and saw the nefarious, the nefarious acts, and also the suffering that the Federation has allowed to happen on Earth. And you can see that with the wars right now.
Exactly.
They didn't stop Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Whether those were atomic or not is another question. But the the destructiveness was enough for them to step in and stop it. So anybody that's believing that narrative that the Federation is going to step in and stop the wars is living on another planet, because that's just not going to happen. And that's the sad news. But on a different note, it's all to me, it's all about the attention of the starseeds. What are we placing our attention upon? And if we're externalizing our power and waiting for saviors in the sky, things are going to continue on the way that they have been. And 99% of the starseeds, unfortunately, are listening to people like Ishmael Perez and others that are saying that, oh, if Earth gets too bad, the Galactic Federation is going to step in. No, they're not. The Galactic Alliance is going to do this, and the Emerald Order is going to do that. It's all just stories. Don't believe it. This is about the attention of the starseeds. If the starseeds think that somebody is going to come swoop in and save them, then they're going to be sitting on their hands, and that's exactly what the Federation wants: is us to sit on our hands and not take back our personal sovereignty on an emotional, on a mental, on a bodily level.
Exactly.
So
That's beautifully put. Thank you. Excellent summary, Jake. And I want to say one more thing about that before we have a nice little short summary from Sarah as well. And that is that just because you might think you're disappointed because you can't wait for the Federation to fix it all, think of the really big picture here, okay? You got tens of thousands of humanoid civilizations alone in this galactic quadrant. And all of them are going to grow up if and when they get coherent enough in the astral to produce the longitudinal coherence you call a gravity wave, or you could call it soul or lucid dreaming skill or astral or remote viewing skill. The physics is the same. If you get implosive compression from bliss, which we now know the frequencies that do that, and which is why PhiRay.com is famous for triggering lucid dreaming, as Therapy was famous for releasing dead ghosts. We know the physics. You get that implosive compression, and then you pop up. You become centripetal, like a great master god avort a tornado in the storm, and you become coherent in the astral. Then you start to get leverage, and that's called growing up. Now, if you've got to babysit tens of thousands of humanoid civilizations and you're a very advanced interstellar plasma intelligence, well, sending ETs in metal crafts over to those 10,000 civilizations, about half of whom are right now being eaten by a soul-eating parasitic black sun, black goo, black Saturn, cult AI, Atun, Akhenaten, whatever you want to call it, which is behind, unfortunately, the Zionists, which is the same black cube with the Muslims and the same black cube worn by the rabbis. It's the same black cube. It is a privilege to be assimilated. Well, that giant galaxy's largest most dangerous plasma parasite, Penny Bradley described very well, from Andromeda, and ironically, which is led by the Mitra, which are pull the strings behind the Atorthans, presumably. Now, this parasite has been eating the souls and the star systems of dozens, if not hundreds, of humanoid civilizations. Well, you think, oh, this is a horrible disaster. They need somebody to come and fix it. No. From a big perspective, this is called biofeedback. If those civilizations grow up to get their aura centripetal enough, immediately when you have access to bliss, implosion in the aura, you can toast those parasites immediately. They fall apart like a deck of cards. Everyone reports that, whether it's uh, Harrison or Dahlia, everyone says as soon as your aura gets some bliss and you have some introduction to this implosion in the aura, immediately at that point you go into the astral and you can blow away hundreds of parasites in all directions. But until then, which is the physics here, that when you have access to bliss, you are no longer a parasite by definition, because that's the first moment you have your own source of charge. So the intergalactic civilization is saying, as long as these humanoid civilizations are sitting around waiting for some ET in a metal ship to come and fix it for them, no, they are part of the problem and not part of the solution. So they have immense and beautiful, loving compassion for us. And as soon as we get leverage in the astral and the ancestors come and wrap you with love and steer you beautifully, then you steer the tornadoes and you're no longer part of the problem. But until then, until you take the inner discipline to steer your own aura, you can't be fixed. Okay, I carried on. Sarah, please say something. We need a female energy here desperately.
Yeah, I want to start by saying something about the disclosure policy and all of that. I really think it's a tricky situation because here we're having a conversation. Um, I'm sure all viewers are already aware of much of what's going on and what needs to be done and what probably is more preferred. But it's really important to consider the whole population of Earth, and a lot is still sleeping. So um, disclosure of ETs and all the agendas on spreading fear, that wouldn't help a lot of people. And I don't think any good light worker or starseed would just not care about it. So I think the better strategy is to keep talking about it, spreading the words, and just allowing people to keep their sanity while they're getting there instead of spreading fear. Because for me, the antonym for life is fear. That's what leads to destruction and more parasites and soul eating and all of that.
That's right. And when Manfred Klein's studied the physics of emotion, and we know the wave shape for anger, which is destructive interference 1/7, and the wave shape for love, which is 1/5 golden ratio implosion, beautifully. But the wave shape for fear, there was no way. The fear was the resistance to all of spin. That's why it's the mind killer, because spin is what gives you implosion and leverage. So when you say, stop the world, I want to get off, I got fear, man, you stop the spin, you stop the implosion. Of course, you lose the inertia, which enables you to steer the tornado. That's why fear is the mind killer, but also makes you food for parasites, because only when you're imploding are you going to kick the parasite's butt.
But then you need to know what to do with the parasites. That's what a good astral shaman would do. If you just throw them away, they're going to go to someone else.
Mm. Maybe you want to say a little more about that. That's a very good point. Very
Yeah,
good.
yeah. I also wanted to share something about transmissions. Apart from noticing, mastering one's own energy and field and um, having bliss and being able to ground and to be fully anchored, I think it's and how important that is to realize which energies are good, which energies resonate more with us. It's transmissions, actually, when we listen to a lot of stories from people. I think that storytelling and oral transmissions were very important in
Yes.
ancient times, because not just because they're sacred and just for a couple of people, but when someone would tell a story with the emotions and they lived the story or have seen it, there is a sort of transmission and the person can see into it. They can feel if it's right or not or wrong.
Feel it.
If there is yeah,
Mm.
it's like kind of like ancestral memories and
Beautiful.
but also it works with extraterrestrials as well. But if we have people just connecting and then just writing something that isn't exactly what they saw, we lose a lot of the information and codes within that. And then if there's someone else who is taking that text and working on it and adding some more, we're completely lost. And when someone watches that or reads that, it's just a lot of mixed data. It doesn't land very well. So it's important to keep the stories right.
Mm.
Just give credits to the person who channeled it originally, because they're the one who saw the vision and they're the one who transmitting the vision with the truth in it.
It's beautiful. And all of the ancient language was an oral tradition, and the oral tradition contained the long wave of ancestor memory, and that is physics of soul. And that's exactly where we're going with this, is that people who live a long time on the same magnetic line, they embed their DNA becomes fractal to their magnetic array, the longitudinal array, and suddenly they're calling the wind and then their songs, they know which song to sing to make that blue corn germinate, the Hopi. That's called physics of soul. And the indigenous peoples had this, and they've been systematically destroyed by the exact culture that we have a problem with today, which is the AI Borg soulless ones. So again, physics of soul is behind all of this conversation because it's what gets that implosion in your blood and gives you leverage on the tornado. And that's where we're going in today's conversation. So
For
that,
that reason, actually, I believe that it's really important that every starseed tries to connect as much as they can, or for a majority of the time, to what they are initially connected to, because that's the strongest connection that they have. That's the strongest line that can bring forth information. And they would have easily access to that instead of having, apart from the ones whose mission is really to bring about information and wake up people um, to those kind of stories, to ETs, to galactic history, to the history of Earth and our connection to that. A lot of people try to connect just to get information or out of ego or to compete with someone. And they go connect with someone that they don't have the DNA for it. They don't have the original connection to it. And that's why interference could come in. And also that means we shouldn't blame them because everyone here on Earth is partially human, if not 100% human. So it's billions of us. And it's human to be wrong sometimes.
and it's a very nice way to think about this, that if you know where you go to hear your ancestors, that ancestor memory. Remember, ancestor memory is the only name for God if you're Aboriginal, which means the longitudinal nodes, the dreaming track song lines. So the skill to be able to hear your ancestors, which is really the phone call to God, no matter how you look at the physics, is exactly what
Don't go to someone's ancestors, go to your own.
that's right. Which is your own bloodline, your own ancestry, and your own leverage on the grid. And this is why people who don't have this ancestral memory don't have access to the long wave leverage that is precisely the currency of the day. Remember, all the ETs agree, the Loosh farms, it's about high power DNA. And the high power valuable DNA are those who have a soul. That's why the fight is over the indigenous ones, because they're the ones that actually steer the song lines. And that's the quality DNA that's so valuable. So once we understand what actually is the only part of us that can be saved, the part we refer to as having a soul, the part we refer to having access to bliss, the part we refer to that can lucid dream and take memory through death, that implosive plasma star cocoon, think of it as a twinkling star, that ability to carry that implosive tornado with us is the only thing that actually gives us leverage in this time of, oh, which ET is coming to save us? It's not about that. It's about when you can make your own inner phone call, and therefore you're connected to the only ETs that really matter, which are the intelligent plasma beings on what you would call the inner plane, the longitudinal array. I have a little outline prepared here, but Jake or Jack, would you like to say something first before we go to that, or?
Well, I think it's easy to get discouraged. Whatever you're listening to, whoever you're listening to, whatever interpretations you're taking from multiple sources, sometimes, like Sarah said, we can get things wrong, and that can be discouraging. I think it's important for people to remember to um, start with their corner, take care of yourself, bliss hygiene, just eat well, eat whole foods, be outside. You don't really have to bash yourself. for not being able to do what you think you should do or be able to do what you ought to be able to do. We can sort of forgive ourselves, and it's important to
Yeah.
To acknowledge that, to be humble enough to actually see that
Yeah.
in yourself so you can clear it and work on it.
And where the Swaruu information climaxes, which is called sovereignty here, that's where you be outside, you're on the magnetic line, you're getting access to your bliss and your inner voice. Exactly. So I think,
yeah, and you don't want to fight for results. You just want to fight for integrity to define who you are. Because I think if people start to um, expect things and they don't come to fruition, it's easy to get bogged down. But if you're fighting for the definition of yourself, it is much easier to continue through anything, because not only everything could go bad and you would still bring through death everything you learn, because death is just a misnomer for it. It's like waking up in a dream. And
that's exactly what it is. The
yeah,
wakefulness in the dream is exactly what longitudinal coherence is. Well, that's wonderful. And so we're going to come back now to Jack's elaborate synthesis of the Swaruu material in these regards, access to sovereignty. We're going to go through these articles in a minute. But first, I've prepared a way to think about this in terms of major themes, how to synthesize this material. So this is now, this to follow along today's conversation, it's all at fractalfield.com/etphysics. So the first step here was to understand the state of affairs, which is profound confusion from everyone who's teaching you about ET. So first, Elena outed Swaruu and said she's AI, and now we realize who is Elena, the propaganda minister for? The AI behind the Federation. Oops, the pot called the kettle black, and then it got messy. And then Donnie Henderson outed Elena, and then Gosha said that Swaruu had been infiltrated, and Jake is an expert on that story. And then Michael Salla decided that Trump is a Pleiadian hero, and the Q people believe that Melanie is behind. Melanie is Pleiadian, and the Q is Pleiadian, and they're going to save us. And that's why Michael Salla says that Trump needs to be president of the whole world. And you're scratching your head thinking, well. And those of us who have looked at this more deeply, and Jack and Jake, we invite comment, believe that the same essentially tall whites and the higher level grays that were behind the seat of Eisenhower and Truman are still behind the administration today and the lies, for example, that the Monroe Institute will promote, which is, yeah. And so obviously we need a definition of sovereignty, a definition of how you see through this for yourself. And so this, again, this is just an outline of major themes. So, and this is going to be in detail in the material from Jack in a minute. The definition of sovereignty is the individual bliss process, which folks call enabled connection to source, meaning you don't need a priest or a guru to phone God, where God is a name for the self-organizing intelligence which forms within the longitudinal array, literally the tornado, when fractal charge circulation is enabled. It was ironic. There was someone from the Hebrew tradition the other day who was saying, "Well, you're only allowed to astral travel if your rabbi you have to ask your rabbi first." What does that mean? Oh, well, it means you need a priest for permission to make a phone call to God. That's the problem, not the solution that we're saying. So this is precisely the only physics which enables vacuum or zero-point energy. So our planet's stupidity in not knowing how to directly metabolize the implosive phase conjugate pump wave Schumann global gravity grid for zero-point energy, not knowing why objects fall to the ground, this is fractalgut.com, is exactly our ignorance in not knowing how to ignite implosively, blissfully, the human aura into coherent aura propagation into the longitudinal array, setting you free for empowerment, that implosion. This is the only definition of sovereignty. Can you start your own tornado? And it's the only definition of being able to steer your aura, and ultimately the definition of what's called having a soul. Most people believe that everybody has a soul. Well, that may be true, but those who are actually able to use that and make phone calls to God and connect with their ancestors and have that kind of leverage have to be conscious of what having a soul means. And that, we believe, starts with the physicsofsoul.com. And remember, we know the frequency signatures which trigger lucid dreaming. It's in the lucid dreaming literature, luciddreamteam.com. It's implosive. So that centripetal force enabling lucid dreaming, inhabiting the grid, is also the physics of soul, access to that leverage on the array. Then there's a discussion here of desertification and patriarchy. Remember when it was Harald Kautz-Vella said the original black goo was an interstellar design by the parasitic AI to remove everything green from every planet it touched. Now, why does the AI not want green? Remember, almost all the documentaries on the death of Muslim cultures on our planet now, and we may defer to Sarah on this, but it's really true that most of the Muslim countries right now are at a shocking end of water in their countries. Iran is just the beginning, but there's many documentaries that almost all the Muslim countries are at a critical juncture from loss of access to water. And why did they lose water? You can say, well, they didn't understand how to keep a water table, but deeper than that, the AI behind the black cube does not want water or green, because when people get access to water and green, they get access to bliss, and then you're no longer food for AI. Aside from the fact that we think that actually water is a poison to certain reptilians who have a form of oil for blood, if you know the chemistry of ET-DNA. This is a deeper story. But actually, see, planets that are turning into deserts and turning radioactive, it means the reptilian Draco are winning. Whereas planets that are turning green, it means the humanoid, the ensouled ones, are winning. So obviously, if the planet is losing, the water's going away. This is why the whole physics of rainmaking becomes central to this theme about those who can make centripetal force. Kids who can put a hole in the cloud with their focus and their bliss. This is the exact opposite of the parasitic AI. And this is why bliss becomes functionally illegal in most Western cultures that are succumbing to the AI, the black goo cultures. That the reason bliss was illegal, because when you have bliss, you don't need a government. So then this drawing here is from Vincent Bridges, who's was working on this, not just rainmaking, but he built this stone temple, and he knew that when there was a eclipse of the moon, you would put the center stone in, and then you could use this to call storms the size of continents. I was there, it worked. This was an introduction to sacred stone circles, and not just the physics of rainmaking, but the physics of ensoulment, that temple structures like this, exquisitely mapped, imploded into the grid, like Stonehenge, for example, are places where your DNA can gather that centripetal force called physics of soul. So if you lived 1,000 generations or even 100 generations near a sacred site, and all your kids, they would fall asleep and they would dream on these magnetic lines, they would embed in that array, and they would begin to steer those magnetic lines in their dreaming. That's why it's called dream spell. So the physics of soul depends on that embedding in the array. And this is related to what's called a Jedi, or the raising of the Jed, the plasma projection, the Jed tube, and the Jedi of the Star Wars story. So understanding physics of soul is compared to the formation of toroidal ball lightning. Here's, we have the little ball here. So the reason ball lightning is so susceptible to telepathy is because it turns inside out recursively, like a slip knot called Uru, meaning Stargate, U-R, to turn, Uru, meaning portal. And so that slip knot, Uru, implodes, and at the center implosion point, it gets connected to the array. And that's why ball lightning is famous for responding to telepathy. That's an example of plasma becoming self-aware, recursive turning inside out. We'll see later that's the Hebrew word Bereshith, which is the symmetry sequence to turn inside out, the first word of Genesis. at first, in principle, the origin of thingness. So versus in Borg-controlled cultures where implosion is illegal, bliss is illegal, whereas in self-empowered cultures, the student is expected to surpass the master. This is where you can kind of tell which traditions are self-empowering. In older Sufi traditions, the student is not allowed to surpass the master. And so this brings us to a theme which may be difficult to speak of, but I wish to briefly. In my career, long career of studying which movements actually empower bliss versus those that create astral tags and feed the Borg, I think a recursive clue is movements that encourage golden ratio and pent imploding, they encourage centripetal bliss. Movements that are afraid of golden ratio and pent imploding, that's a clue that they're astral tags for the Borg. And now I'm going to give you some examples of that. Ashiana Dean, originally Anna Hayes, her original texts were, I think, useful, but then she dumped our friend Phil. And then she announced that the golden mean was evil. And then Ashiana announced her Kilanta, which is the opposite of the actual physics of alphabet. So the day that Anna Hayes announced that Ashiana announced that golden mean was evil is the day that whole movement became an astral parasite, in my humble view. And there's just enough distortion there. Another example. So I taught with Flower of Life Drunvalo for many years, and everything was hex. And every time you mention anything pent or golden ratio, oh my God. You can read about that at goldenmean.info/Merkaba. So indeed, they were afraid of real blissful implosion. And so the point was that, and we now know that many of the people that just visualized a tetracube in their aura and did not visualize pent, they became susceptible to massive astral tags. And I have many stories to tell about that. So in only a tetracube movement called Merkaba, like the phylactery of the rabbi and the cube of the Muslims, the black cube, in a cubic array, there is no ultimate implosion. So you can embed in a super dielectric in a localized array, and that's how it is a privilege to become assimilated. That's how you become a Borg. That's why when you feed your aura into a black cube, hint, the one worn on the forehead of the rabbi and the one which the Muslims rotate around. When you rotate around a black cube, carbon black cube, and feed your memory into that black cube, which originally we think was behind Saturn, it is a privilege to assimilate, means there is no ensoulment, no individuation, and no bliss. So yes, you do become immortal. That's the blue pill, red pill that unfortunately Akhenaten ate. And then there's the parallel to Joseph Smith, who was quite a trickster. When he was studying the Society Akkadian, the Akkadian origins of the plasma symmetry domains, burnt into the gold copper foil, the Mormon genetic records, he used a tetracube, Urim and Thummim, to index plasma domain symmetry. This is the Hebrew tetracube, Ibi Uru, which is a superset of which becomes a Feynman-Enochian. And we're going to discuss that in the more advanced literature later. So these are just introductions to examples of, if they're afraid of golden ratio and implosion, you know they ain't self-empowering. Another example. So Monroe Institute. Well, I knew Bob Monroe for many years, and then I knew Laurie Monroe. And originally when Ed Wilson discovered golden ratio was the ultimate way to plasma project, and Bob Monroe was scared to death of it. So his research director, 40 years ago now, left Ed Wilson, MD, left Bob Monroe to come and make a film with me because he knew golden ratio was powerful, and Bob Monroe was scared to death of it. Well, 30 years later, I tried to teach Laurie Monroe the same thing. And of course, she was scared to death of it too. It turns out that the CIA was their paymaster. And as Shane, Jake's friend, our shaman, who wants us to talk about this, concluded that the Focus 27, one of the top levels of the Monroe Institute training, is a massive soul trap. He's very sure. And what was the clue? They were afraid of golden ratio. They were afraid of real implosion. So Shane went in there and he released it. And he said that, these other people like Lynn Buchanan and even Joe McMoneagle, they were all military. They were paid by the military. The military told them who they had to go in and kill in the astral planes. And they lied for the military. This was their only loyal. And so what do you expect at the top of the Monroe Institute? You see a massive soul trap. Now, I think there's another example here. I just want to help you understand how to recognize a soul trap. And Sarah, here I mentioned Joe Dispenza. Did you have a comment on that?
Yeah, well, I didn't meet him in person, or I was never in the same space with him, but a lot of people have reported getting entity attachments in events. Also, a remote viewer I worked with mentioned some connections to grays, but it's not my personal experience. It's just things I was told to just be careful. But then when I tapped into the galactic history and also to try to prepare a bit for the video today, everything I got was philosophical and ancient texts around good, evil, and the role of humanity. And a part of it is understanding that if something is heavily attacked, not by people, but sometimes by people, mostly by parasites and dark entities, is because a lot of good can come out of it, and they want to stop that.
Yes.
So it's really important to be careful, know the truth, and also try and wake people up to things within their field. Maybe try to help if they can, so they can clear what they can clear. Obviously, a lot of maybe institutions or people decide to go on a specific route, and there's nothing you can do about that because we have free choice, free will. That's why we're here. Basically, most of what I got is that we're really here on Earth to learn about good and evil. And even for ETs, the notion of good and bad, it doesn't exist because everyone is aligned to their mission, and for them, that's the good thing. And everyone not aligned with that is in contrast or contradiction. And the fact that after incarnating in different star systems, we're really coming here because we have the control. And that's why I think the ETs are not coming to help anyone. We're the one who are here to help, actually.
Nice. Yeah. And just to finish the thought, so similar to the way we saw astral tags behind the tetracube Merkaba, a flower of life, which also was behind Yurka and Gaia, teaching Joe Dispenza. Joe never refers to bliss, I don't think. He never uses the word Kundalini, even though he's talking only about Kundalini, actually, because the actual Kundalini bliss is not the goal there, unfortunately. There is a certain agenda, a certain glass ceiling here, which unfortunately is the planting of astral tags and not serving real empowerment. And we think the suspicious parts of those movements give us a clue to when those movements, for example, when Thorhan's brother teaches Dan Willis to call it a Fibonacci instead of golden ratio. What is the clue there? Oh, they're afraid of golden ratio. They're afraid of implosion. They're afraid of bliss. It's not about real empowerment. So
Yeah,
I think
Fibonacci as well was called evil, and even Schumann resonance.
it,
The Schumann, it was called evil. And that's when actually, when everything is attacked, when everything is bad, like what do? You're lost. You're separated from anyone. You're alone. You're easy food.
it's like Ashiana Dean saying the golden ratio is evil. No, the golden ratio is the phase conjugate punctuate that allows you to implode and make the connection to source, which is how you get a soul. Anyway,
Allows you to dissolve evil.
exactly.
Yeah.
And that is the point, that at the implosion point, only the shareable wave survives, and that is the dissolution of parasites and evil. Precisely. Thank you.
I want to share a personal experience, actually. You spoke of astral tags. There are also the power implants. And I've noticed this with my team, actually. They send me to do things. I didn't see them as missions, but I would get into something and I would find a power implant or astral tags or attacks. And then I would sit with them and like asking, why is this happening? Why did you send me there? And I would say that I was sent there, it's part of my mission because I can actually clear it. So being in that line or in that place would allow me to go up and actually break the whole system
Clear.
and bring it back to source, bring it back to light, connect it back to light. This came to me as the middle path, actually, which is instead of saying this is all good, this is all bad, see what's bad and try to bring it back to its connection to light, to God, to source. And that's why with the earthbound, you're so loving and you send them to the heavens, to God. And that's why also with the parasites, you just connect them, you plug them back in because
Mhm.
they hijack people to feed on the soul. And they need the vessel. So they keep the vessel alive. They keep the person alive and they keep feeding on them. And if something happens, they jump into someone else because they don't have soul. They don't have that connection. They were severed from it. So the solution is just connect
Embed.
them back.
Yeah,
Yeah.
implode them back into the array and they're saved. What that means is they become
Mhm.
then distributed, which is how you release souls. Beautiful. So actually, that's why you don't really call it ghost busting. You call it ghost loving, imploding. And so this is going to lead us to the major lessons from the Swaruu material takeout, which we're going to now review in a little bit with Jack here. But before we do that, I'd like to go back to Jake for a minute, if I could. Jake, we're not going to let you off the hook too easy here, okay? So when half the world was sort of like brokenhearted because we were listening to Swaruu telling us to take out Pleiadians and getting a real daily countdown on where the ET politics was, and we learned about the corrupt Federation. Then there was that horrible, horrible moment. Valerie, would you answer that, please? Oh, yeah. That there was that horrible moment when Gosha made a 3-hour film saying, "Oh no, that Swaruu and Sophia, the Pleiadians got infiltrated, and now their message is gone," which was late last year. And both you and Jack were profoundly involved with that. And can you sort at all for us? You said to me at one point, Jake, that you thought because remember, just at that point, the Swarunian material was saying the Torthans were a big part of the problem. They were very drunken. They were messing up Viera, and the Torthans were big part of the corruption of the Federation. And the Andromedans were not helping with the corruption of the Federation. And we were getting somewhere with that material. And suddenly the Tegotan Pleiadians were somehow disempowered, and we were like, oh, very sad. Comment from Jake.
Yeah. So, this is what happened. There were when Mari was talking about the Torthans, they were coming into Earth's airspace, and whenever they show up in a system, then wars escalate. And
Mhm.
she said that. She called that out. Do you remember that, Jack?
Yeah.
When the Atorthans come in.
When the Torthans show up inside of a system, like Earth's house, they showed up in Earth's airspace, then wars on Earth are going to escalate and things seem to go in a destructive way. And that's exactly what happened.
What a
And,
coincidence.
and it's that type of vital information that we were getting that was so dangerous.
Mhm.
Now, there were a lot of precursors, there were a lot of signs being shown to the Taigetans. There was some new some new CIC structure that been brought in that they didn't fully trust, and there were a lot of warning signs that things were going into a negative direction with the Taigetans, because there are different factions of Taigetans,
Marie
and
was
they've been
being
at
Marie,
war.
Marie was being threatened. What they were being threatened.
Yes, Marie was being threatened, and they were all trying to, they were trying to kill them with, poison and everything else. And it's at that point, that I think the Federation just took over and started to put their own propaganda out
Yeah.
through the channel.
That's what Gosha said. Gosha said that's how
Yeah,
Marie suddenly became a propagandist for the Federation instead of, which was horrible.
And it turned into a savior narrative where
Yeah,
they were going to
that's right.
right.
take
And
over the
that was
Federation.
the red flag.
That was, yep.
That
That,
Yeah.
that was the red flag that, it turned into the savior narrative where they brought the Irma into it, and the Irma were cleaning up the galaxy. I mean, cleaning up, the Earth airspace and da 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 da. And that was the huge red flag that, made everybody go, oh,
yeah.
okay.
That's when Gosha said it's a mess. Gosha announced, "Oh, our whole communication with the Pleiadians was suddenly a mess." But
Yeah.
the whole library before that, which Jack is expert. But finish your thought, Jake. Sorry. Yeah.
Oh, it's done.
Yeah. Okay. So, but Jake, before we get to Jack, here are a few more clues in there. But you said after the Tegotan Palladians were kind of wiped out in their ability to limit the corruption of the Federation, it appeared that some of that role was being filled by, and then you mentioned Antarians and you mentioned Etorthans, didn't you? Or did I get that right?
No, no. So basically, there was the second contact program that was supposed to be implemented, and they were outfitting a bunch of ships with Earth technology because in order to communicate with humans, you can't use, according to the Prime Directive, you can't use a technology that's greater than what we have on Earth. So they were outfitting ships, and they were going to take to the airwaves and contact people, and that had to be shut down. The Federation could not let that stand because the first contact program, even though it had failed, it had definitely succeeded in some ways with getting the information that we do have from them out. Uh, so, so yeah, the we don't know what happened after about a year, maybe even longer ago. We don't know what happened with the contact. We know that it was shut down, and
Yeah.
it's extremely unfortunate.
This is where, in Jack's analysis of the Swaruu recordings, with help, he really did a great synthesis. For example, the lady they called Cinna, which was Med or Tim Space News currently, who was how Gosha met Swaruu, whom we knew her, we called her Med for many years here. And Swaruu reports that actually Cinna became the problem and not the solution. That's part of the outline there at fractalfield.com/etphysics, where there was direct online communication with the Pleiadians happening. And Cinemed called it doofus at the time. And I was there, I was online, and Captain Keela of the Pleiadians was actually communicating with us directly. But it was very interfered with and controlled by. And Cinemed said, no, the Tegotan Pleiadian queens were too controlling. And Swaruu said, no, no, Med Cinna was too controlling. It was really a horrible mess.
Swaruu ended up
Go ahead, go ahead.
claiming that Cinna was an organic portal that had multiple entities running through her, and the essence of an organic portal makes it extremely difficult to actually figure out exactly who is working through them.
Yes, you can read that detailed story and Jack's analysis. It's all at fractalfield.com/etphysics, specifically saying that at a certain moment there, uh, I had known and worked with Med Tim Sinha for so many years before then, and she was very difficult. That at that point, she had promised Swaruu that she could meet me, and it's shocking in retrospect that Swaruu claims that Cinemed prevented Swaruu from meeting me, and that's why she broke up with Cinemed Tim at that time, which is the opposite of everything I was told. And yet there's a detailed film from Swaruu saying, no, the moment at which she dumped Tim Med was when Tim Med refused to let Swaruu talk to me, which
Yeah,
is
that was supposed to happen.
yeah, because apparently Tim Med was interested in the fractal physics, and that's the next conversation here is the comparison of the fractal physics from the Tegotan Pleiadians versus our work and a lifetime study of fractal physics and the empowering thereof. And I have to admit that when Swaruu talks about, propulsion and time, when Swaruu talked about physics, it was unsatisfying, honestly. She tried and she did, I'm for a young lady who Swaruu apparently was of teenage years, the ability to communicate physics language was pretty limited. And as a result, most of that was really fairly unsatisfying, unfortunately. But the intention behind it was beautiful, that there was actually a beautiful spiritual vortex-based physics which could help understand spirituality, and it was fractal based. This was gorgeous. But of course, they described the vortex as based on Fibonacci instead of climaxing in golden ratio. And they and when we never got to communicate with Tim Med and Swaruu. So this brings us back to Jack and his history of that story, which is the ET Physics article. And maybe we should just look at some of that here briefly. Is that we actually go through some of those paragraphs just as an outline form, Jack, if that's okay with you? Or so so here is fractalfield.com/etphysics. So in the first article there, which is Jack's summary of the Swarunian material with the help of Claude. And it's entitled The Ensouled versus the Ensouled and the Administered. And it goes into the question of what counts as a soul. And remember, my thought was soul is the centripetal compression point originating from the aura, but able to propagate into the array where implosive compression, bliss, creates enough centripetal force to inhabit and later steer, like a tornado, the local coherent fabric of the grid, the longitudinal array. This is literally an Indra's net of fractal coherent longitudinal EMF nodes, Star Mother Kit, forming the collective unconscious, sometimes called dreaming track songlines. Remember, longitudinal fields is the stuff of gravity waves and stuff of ancestor memory. And that coherence in that array is called soul. So hence, the presence of the long wave feeling in that larger array is the physics of compassion, the feeling of something bigger than you. So the ability to have compassion for something bigger than you becomes universal in this infinitely embedded fabric among the ensouled. In other words, being able to feel long wave compassion is a primary indicator of the ability to have a soul. This is powerful. Jack, you want to comment on this part here? What counts as a soul, etc.?
Sure. Can you hear me at all now?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, sorry, I had to move. I don't know if you had attempted to hand it off to me, but let me know if there's any breakups. But generally, I found it interesting doing a couple of cross analyses of your work versus theirs, and I know there was some discrepancies that came up, but I think the majority of them had to do with uh, Swaruu 9 years ago. This is like 6 or 7 years ago. Um, Having to distill extraordinarily complex topics that she understood in base 12 to something that's more uh, commonly held. So her commonly held colloquially for people to synthesize with uh, with what they already understand. And so
We should not to interrupt, but to mention that Tim had told us for years, the Pleiadians always emphasized we must do our physics math in base 12. And now I realize why. In base 12, golden ratio is not an imaginary number. It's actually expressible. But more than that, the 5-7 spin symmetry pairs, which is the physics of DNA braiding and the heart of the sun and the heart of the Anu and the heart of hydrogen and the heart of the human, that 5-7 spin symmetry pair, or the charge collapse, obviously tetracube dodeca ecosa 5-7 spin symmetry pair, that charge collapse is the physics of soul. So obviously actual wave mechanics are a 12 based symmetry array. So doing your math in base 12, the Pleiadians are right. So that's behind. So please carry on. So I
yeah,
interrupt.
I found the synthesis to be interesting, where you're definitions of gravity were pretty much the same. The importance of the toroid and vortex mathematics, whether it be base 10 or base 12, they're both consistent within their framework. It's just empirically base 12 is more powerful, but it's non-communicable between scientists. So it's more important to stay within something that is at least communicable to other people. And then your definition and function of consciousness DNA, specifically DNA, was incredibly similar.
Yes, that's right.
And
Basically, DNA, 5 spins inside, 7 spins outside. So you have 5 spins in the dodeca ratchet down the helix thread, and then you braid the braid of the braid of the braid on braid, 7 times recursively outside with 5 spins inside, and then it becomes toroidal, and so it implodes, and that implosion embeds in a long wave during bliss. Plot thickens. Toroidal DNA is we have photomicrographs. And that's the physics of bliss, imploding, braiding, programming DNA by the long wave embedding. And so that's called a fractal antenna. It's literally a longitudinal array. So when you have bliss, you can measure the increase in the braid density coherence of DNA. That's the work we did with Glenn Ryan for years, et cetera. So this is, yes, the physics of DNA and the physics of bliss is imploding a fractal antenna into a longer wave array, precisely.
now I think the like axiomatic definition of a soul was less talked about than the quality of the soul, especially having to do with the quality of emotional or empathetic ability, and therefore embeddability. Um,
Yes. Well,
so
yeah. In other words, this is for context here. In fact, I think I'm going to stop this share. So these discussions are all Jack has assembled these discussions into beautiful articles, fractalfield.com/etphysics. But let's dwell on this just a bit more about physics of soul. So yes, it might be true that everyone has a soul in sense that there's that spark inside them, but whether they'll actually take memory through death, and this is why so many ETs are saying it's now that many of the humans on this planet are actually non-playing characters because they don't really have connection to their own soul. Even Jane Roberts' Education of Oversoul 7 talked about this. If you don't get imploding, you can't make a phone call to your ancestors, so you don't have that connection, that empowering connection to source, as it's called.
Dolores Cannon as well, even. I
Yeah.
think that was one of her
Yes.
original ideas as well.
Yes. So if your children got to go out into the sacred forest and there's a stone circle and a labyrinth, and they would sleep there and dream there for many days, and then they would come back dreaming about ancestor memories thousands of years old, they're getting a soul. On the other hand, if your children are sleeping in a metal building full of electrosmog, Wi-Fi, and Bluetooth, where Schumann resonance hasn't touched the place in a decade, sorry, no. Unfortunately, the long wave cannot embed, and therefore the ensoulment process is lost long term. So you got billions of children with Bluetooth in their ears every day, and they're scrambling their souls quite literally, quite electrically. And that's why I say it is absolutely critical we teach the physics. I mean, electrical engineers, the physics of what it is to have a soul, or we're never going to make an intelligent decision about what AI is for.
Yeah. And I think it's important to understand that one of the key Taigetan takeaways was that, we've said this before, but as above, so below isn't just a metaphysical or esoteric concept. That is a axiomatic mathematical concept.
Hmm.
And so when you're looking at the way that uh, the Earth is governed, you can portray back and forth, you can project fractally onto the way that the Galactic Federation is operating and is compartmentalized into. So the pieces that are of administrative power, whether they be organizations or specific races, um, it's generally seen that just as we have here, not necessarily less emotional beings are put in positions of power to make them more susceptible to astral influence, just because the same way that politicians and secret societies have their astral influence from behind them, beings and things that they've, all these rituals, all this ritualistic sacrifice, that has to do with astral tags and astral influence. The same way that they are, sorry, my cat, being influenced from behind by astral entities, the higher galactic federation is also being influenced by these entities, and the specific races that are put in these apex positions of power in terms of administrative duty, having to deal with problems, and that people have to go to them to have any say on in any governmental discussion. They happen to be of less embeddable quality generally. These races, like, and it sort of goes up in,
Yeah.
From Andromedans being lower emotion, having no planet to call home anymore. And then as you go higher, it's less and less emotion, which makes them more and more susceptible to astral influence.
And the AI
Because
problem. Exactly. And I'd
it was
like to,
interesting because
sorry.
before I forget, one of the most important ways that the Irmas had a lot of military and ethical dilemmas with and problems with the Atorphans. And one of the ways that they described how the Atorphans operate is that if they cannot convince you of something through logic and reason, they will telepathically speak through your own voice and make it so that you believe it's yourself thinking these things. And I'm sure this type of stuff happens to people on Earth all the time if you're a
Exactly.
starseed of influence at all.
Yeah,
And
Go.
one of the ways that the Irma were able to reject this influence was through ethics alone. They have such a high quality of soul, of embeddability, that they're able to, through their own morals, understand what thoughts are and aren't theirs.
Wonderful point.
That
Wonderful
makes
point.
them
Beautiful.
highly unsusceptible and generally an enemy to the power structure that is the Federation.
That's right. The AI don't like that when you can see the difference. Jake, I'm sure you have a comment.
it's incredibly important to understand how much mind control is going on in space. It's happening not just in the Galactic Federation, but I mean, the Taigetans, they wouldn't even be around the Atorthans because they were susceptible to the mind control. And that's exactly the type of thing that Jack is talking about. Now, that alongside the Galactic, Federation propaganda that's being put out there on the airwaves, because I mean, ETs watch the news just as much as we do. You know what I mean? They pay attention, and they're 99.9% of the ETs are never going to incarnate on Earth. They're too scared to.
That's right.
And, they're very susceptible to this type of mind control and this type of Federation propaganda.
Yeah.
Now, because of the work that we were doing and the Taigetans were doing and the collaboration between the Earth and the Taigetans, people were waking up, even space people were waking up, even civilizations were waking up to the, to what's been happening. So anyway, I just wanted to chime in and say that, the mind control is extremely
Tricky. And the astral warrior, the Urma, they're right in there. They're surgeons in the ethers, man. And they can pick out when the Etorthans are whispering into your inner voice and cheating you because they can see through it. And I wanted to give a very practical introductory example to just what Jack and Jake are talking about here. Remember that our plasma tech, this is not a shameless ad, but our PhiRay.com is famous. Often in the first session, people of any tendency, they become more clairvoyant. Suddenly they can see through people's aura like a medical intuitive. Now, the reason the clairvoyance onsets when you feed golden ratio into plasma is you get imploded and you embed into that array longitudinal coherence, which is the name for what clairvoyance means. For the same reason that when you teach the same golden ratio and the same frequencies to kids having brainwaves and they start to see without their eyes, flameinmind.com, those same kids start seeing their dead grandparents and their parents freak out. The physics of that clairvoyance. Now, the onset of that clairvoyance is the same as lucid dreaming because it's, again, ability to embed, implode, and get leverage on that array. Maybe maybe before I have a set of outlines here I have to do from Shane for the climax of the story. But before we do that, as a practical example of this, Sarah, um, do, do you want to, so when you became aware that you had a form of clairvoyance was kind of the beginning of your ability to sort among the parasites, true or false?
True, but it also freaked me out at the beginning.
Uh-huh.
I was very young, so
Uh-huh.
I wouldn't couldn't sleep at night. I was seeing, dark shadows everywhere.
Uh-huh.
Um, I
Nice.
kind of suppressed it a bit as well for a while, and then woke it up again. And then with my awakening, it got stronger. But I still needed to do the learning and
But
um,
that's so the moment you overcame, so you realized you were seeing all this and it freaked you out. And then the turning point later when you realized you could use that to sort among parasites was you studied, you learned, you had teachers, you
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
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 I think now it's much more easier for children to wake up to those capacities if they are around people who
yeah.
have already activated them and developed them. I have my niece, for example, she's barely 11, and she sees ghosts, you can say,
Wonderful.
souls and
Yes.
things, and she comes and tells me. So I told her how to open a column of light and help them.
Lovely. So this is what, so that's why we're here, guys. We're the electrical engineers telling you the physics of enabling to see auras is the day you start also be able to deal with parasites once you realize what it is. The same way as learning the lessons of the physics of soul is the day you learn what AI is for. Until then, you're clueless. So anybody that's out there trying to teach you how to limit AI and how to pass governments about what AI should and should not do, who does not know the history of AI parasites in the galaxy and who does not know the physics of soul, these people should not be in government trying to make laws about AI because they don't know what it's for. Because until you know what making a soul is, you're clueless. So we need to be out there teaching the electrical engineers. That's why. But I love it, Sarah, when you start talking about your niece starts to see auras, and now she's comfortable because you're there. That's
Yeah, she started a couple of years ago, but she didn't tell me straight away. But when she did, I helped with the clearing for a while, and then I decided to teach her.
That's wonderful. See, that's why you're here to be an example to us. Exactly. So I made a promise to Jake's friend, a shaman from Florida and New Mexico named Shane, who has been helping Jake, um, and he's the one who spent so many years with the Monroe Institute and realized that he had to clear 100 of trapped souls out of their Focus 27, and that their military background meant that it's a massive soul trap. Well, this was from Shane, and so he had some things he really wanted me to mention today, and I just needed to try to act on my promise. So it is he that is saying that Iran is a portal, and that's what's behind much of this present is the competition for that portal. You remember that all the wars are over the stargates Uru, Asa, Elam, Jerusalem. Uru means portal, Asa means royal, queen of, El is the place of the phase shift. So the war is always over the stargate, and um, that behind the Bush and Trump is the same tall whites who fooled Eisenhower and Truman and he says that the one of the lead remote viewers here, who is behind Elena, actually, unfortunately, has no soul, and that seems insulting at first. But then you realize that most of these people really do not have access to their own ancestral memory, and you need to think deeply about what science of soul means. And that's where he gets into this complete focus on access to the ensouled indigenous peoples. And Shane is deeply involved with trying to save the indigenous peoples of Greenland and the indigenous peoples of Lakota and the indigenous peoples of the Southwest, because the destruction of the indigenous peoples was a systematic destruction of ensoulment on our planet. And we need to see that's been behind You know, what the rise and fall of the Spanish Empire, the rise and fall of the British Empire, all these empires, their rise and fall is the story of the destruction of indigenous peoples. And the destruction of indigenous peoples is the systematic destruction of soul. And we need to understand that, because do you know why the giant ET parasite that's trying to run this planet is afraid of indigenous peoples? Because they're the ones with leverage. Jake, do you have a comment on that, or is that?
No, I'm just listening.
Yeah, yeah. So, Shane is really wanting us to make this point, and Shane goes back in these conversations to Robert Morningsky, whom I knew very well. His book, The Terra Papers, which is about the ET Anunnaki history from the Hopi perspective. And I really enjoyed my work with Robert Morningsky and the Terra Papers, etc. And that we need to understand that almost every indigenous tribe understood their relationship to the ET peoples. For example, the Hopi, they call them Anunnaki, the ant friends, and they call them the ant people, and they emerged from the place of Sipapu. This is all indigenous wisdom. And murdering indigenous peoples is synonymous with allowing the AI to eat the earth. This is what he's saying. We need to be aware of this. And he talked about Monroe more. He talked about Joe Dispenza. He talked about Greenland. Let me see if I got my notes. Ah, yes. And he reminds us that any extraterrestrials who arrive here to do things in metal ships are basically, at a fundamental level, immature and childish. And the important ones arrive in living plasma through the heart of the sun. And those are the ones that are evolved. And those are the ones that we need to relate to. And calling ETs to arrive here in metal ships to fix us is evidence of immaturity. I guess that's the main message here. So I'm not sure if we got to a happily ever after. I'm sorry, Jack, do you think, is there more that you want to say in summarizing the Pleiadian message here? Do you want me to
Yeah,
go?
I had 2 points,
Okay,
and then we can kind of wrap it up.
okay.
Up to you though. Um, I think it's important, um, as a precursor for people to understand that there is a lot of talk about resonance and what resonates with people. And, unfortunately, sometimes the truth will not resonate in a way that a hopeful psychological operation will. But it's important that people, you know, not that there is one source or one thing that people ought to listen to, but when you're comparing your own uh, your information and you're creating a a set of axioms to live by, it's important that people, number one, they stay in high frequency. They understand that things are, you know, the highest integration, the highest frequency or vibration is not love, but integration. And so some of uh, these difficult ideas, whether or not they're true, you can still integrate them, and you have interpretive responsibility over whether they're going to have power over you and cause you fear, or whether or not you're going to interpret uh, that message in a way that is empowering. Now, um, you should stay high frequency, careful of the resonant thing. If something doesn't necessarily empower you instantaneously, you can do some shadow work with the idea and move it somewhere that is empowering. And now people need to take action as well. I think it's sort of a dangerous idea that's brought up in a lot of this new age stuff where you're just sort of staying in high frequency all the time without uh, looking at the tiger in the room. Just because just because you have a wonderful mental field doesn't mean that tiger's not in the room. He's still a threat. So to integrate that tiger, that threat, that thing that doesn't resonate with you is much more powerful than simply ignoring it.
Yeah.
And so to end this on a good note, the more people integrate and do shadow work and raise their frequency, aka become in a state of phase conjugate charge coherence, um, they start to have an incredible amount of influence through mind alone. And now there was a Tibetan scientist on their science ship who did interferometer readings, a study, and he came to the conclusion that just the average unawakened starseed even has the equivalent in its frequency, creative frequency, to 1,500 normal people. But one highly awakened starseed has influence over tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands, sometimes more, influencing millions. Someone like that influencing an incredible amount of people is someone like David Icke, someone who's doing a ton of public speaking. And so not only can you integrate and become higher frequency or electrically, like Dan says, more phase coherent and embeddable, uh,
Implosive?
implosive. Yes, you can take action, and sometimes it doesn't need to be like we spoke about earlier. It doesn't need to be making yourself a target or doing making your sacrificing yourself in some way. You can still take care of your corner. Saving yourself uh, tends to save your world because everything is a projection of us at the end of the day.
Nice.
And
Nice. Yes. And
so I think, it's the classic Spider-Man quote, with great power comes great responsibility. And it's important that people take care of themselves through bliss hygiene, and they understand that they have an incredible influence, even if they can't necessarily
right.
see it
Yes,
physically.
it's like when we figured out that Kundalini was electrically contagious, bliss is contagious, which is to say awareness is contagious, implosion is, well, when you become centripetal, then you're the opposite. We say get centripetal or get dead. You become centripetal and your environment begins to form, literally crystallize, Christos, around you. So this is wonderful. So we're getting a bit of a sense of the happily ever after or the final comment here. Thank you so much, Jack. And remember, Jack's elaborate analysis of the synthesis of the Swaroonian, Tagotan Pleiadian history. Please, fractalfield.com/etphysics, small letters, one word. Jake and Sarah, maybe just any final thoughts? I mean, we should not give up on understanding ET history, but our primary action should be
Our primary action should be, I think, to first do what Jack said and be in our hearts, because the earth is the heart of the universe, which is a reflection of our own hearts as well, connected directly to our own heart. So being in our heart is really important, always. And the more advanced you are, the more techniques you learn, you understand the importance of going back to the basics, what the ancient teachings were about: meditation, grounding, connecting to God, being in your heart, and sending love to everyone.
which is the real embedding. Beautiful. And, I remind you that Sarah will be teaching in the alchemy series and the magic of centripetal alchemic spiritual alchemy series at scienceofconsciousnessacademy.com. It's the first week in June. Sarah will be there along with Teresa and the whole science of alchemy, the Arabic origins of alchemy. So that Sarah will be with us teaching. It'll be wonderful. First week in June, scienceofconsciousnessacademy.com. Thank you, Sarah. And so the real point there was that your first step is actually to go within and get centripetal, and you will see the tornado from there. Beautiful. Thank you. And Jake, any final thoughts here?
I just want everybody to know that you can keep on seeking the truth and you will find it. Seek the truth. If you're a starseed, your attention is your currency. Whatever you're placing your attention on, that's what really, really matters. And I'm, convinced that this may be a weird way of thinking about it, but I believe that we can solve the problems of this earth by what we place our attention on. And right now, I feel like our attention is being pulled to external things when it should be internalized. Our power should be internalized. Take sovereignty over your mind, over your body, over your choices. Just question everything.
Mm-hmm. And if people are looking at governments making messes, like governments that cause wars, and feeling somewhat powerless, uh, maybe even some kind of collective shamanic, collective lucid dreaming, collective prayer, that has a force on that government, even in the astral. That's very amazing once we understand how powerful we are in the astral.
100%.
Yeah, thank you, Jake, the Astral Warrior. Well, that was the happily ever after. Yes or no? Look, guys, uh, when you look at this planet and the problems we have, for example, the war in Iran is basically an energy problem, and yet we do not know how to metabolize gravity into energy. Metabolizing gravity into energy is literally the physics of bliss. So when you learn how to eat gravity, you swallow the gravity. It's called phase constant Schumann pump wave centripetal force, and you become centripetal. That charge collapse is called 0 point energy. Hello, if we understood 0 point energy, this war would be obsolete, right? And if we understood the same charge collapse physics, suddenly we have the time reversal called MedBed, which is an extension of what is PhiRay.com. And what soon, wait till you see our new optical tech coming out. It's amazing. We have all these technologies. They're right available at hand. We understand perfectly. All we need is communication among aware people who are not in fear. And these technologies are right there, right available to us. Electrogravitics, time reversal, anti-aging, MedBed, 0 point energy, plasma tech. We have this, we have the information, we have the tech, we have the understanding. We can do this. The team is assembling. There is reason for optimism. And once we understand these things, the wars are just childish. So, does that make you feel better? Well, if we create a shareable wave and understand these things, then in fact we create the necessary critical mass and we implode into bliss together. So, thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Jack. Thank you, Jake. Any final
Thank you.
thoughts? Did, did we have fun today?
I'm happy
I
to
think we
have met
did, yeah.
Jake and Jack today.
We're happy you came and smiled with us. We'd been crotchety without you, Sarah. You're the hero. And Jack, you did all that amazing homework on synthesizing the Tegotan Palladian information. We'll have more there, but fractalfield.com/etphysics, check it out. And Jake, thank you for being the astral warrior, the Urma there. We kind of thought we lost you for a while. We're glad you were back with you because we need your strength.
You got to go through the dark night of the soul sometime.
And Jake came out the other side. We're grateful. Thanks,
Always.
thanks everybody. Happy
Thank you.
bliss to you. Follow the inner tornado. The sovereign self is the blissful self. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.